Okay, so this talk is called The Operating System of You, and it is a fairly ambitious talk. It is one of, I think it's my second ever non technical talk. So thank you for being here and trusting in a in a non technical talk by me. So the origin of this talk basically came from me reading this article from the New Yorker, basically describing the friendship that made Google huge. Basically, a profile of Jeff Dean and Sanjay Gemawat from Google. Together, these two are responsible for BigQuery, Spanner, Google Translate, Bigtable, MapReduce, LevelDB, TensorFlow, and Google Brain at Google. And I'm sure there's other stuff that they just made and threw away that was equally amazing. And what's interesting is that with these guys, Google has a career ladder. It goes up from L3, which is the entry level, and all the way out to L10. These two are the only L11s in Google. And it's always an interesting phenomenon of like, how do you deconstruct top performers like these? So that's what I wanted to talk about today. And I found this really interesting Hacker News comment in 2013. For those who work inside Google, this guy's a Googler, says they aren't actually all that much more productive in terms of code compared to a decent SWE3, which is the entry level engineer. The reason they have a reputation as rock stars is that they can apply this productivity to things that really matter. So that's an interesting phenomenon, right? Like that productivity is not just like lines of code, but it's also the things that you choose to work on, and also like just the overall system that you have to produce and output. It's not just raw coding ability. And I think the main insight that I had when thinking through like developer productivity and performance is that our basically our hardware doesn't differ that much. Our IQ scores are rated such that 70% of the population is within 30 IQ points of each other, right? 95% of us, like the 95th percentile top smartest person in the world, is only 30% smarter than the average. That's how IQ is constructed. And then the variance is just not that high. I can explain a little bit of variance in developer sort of careers and performance by looking at where they are in the stack. So, for example, if you're lower down, you may be in higher demand because there's fewer of you. And if you're in higher up, there may be just a lot more of you, and you may actually this may be emerging fields. Obviously, there's intra layer differences, but it's kind of roughly borne out, for example, in the latest Stack Overflow survey, where SRE and DevOps are kind of highly rated because that's a new emerging discipline. And then stuff where it's like front end and mobile, obviously these are hugely averaged. There are obviously people who make a lot of money doing front end and mobile, but on average, they tend to make less. That's an interesting phenomenon that I imagined, that I found, but it's not really like, these are not really sort of enough to really distinguish the differences between developer performance. Because I'm normally based in the US markets, and in the US you can also see these salary ranges also from Stack Overflow, where these are like the median and then like the 70% confidence intervals. But then you can see that this is a log scale. So the best performing developers are earning $1 million compared to the average, let's say, earning 200,000 in San Francisco. But also in like, even in like Minneapolis, where the average is like under 100K, you still get people earning like maybe 800, 900K. So that's an interesting, like, these are not like 2 times better. These are not 3 times better. These are like 8, 9, 10 times better. And that's a very interesting phenomenon to study. There's also, I think people emphasize the 10x developer too much. There's also like, it's not just individual developers, it's also team performance. And if you can have a high performing team, you really feel it versus a less well performing team. And some people have done some studies on this, where the top tier teams can perform up to 3 times faster than the median, and then the lowest tier teams can perform 3 times slower. So like, on some flawed metric, there's some spread, right? Not all developers are made equal, and I always want to try to deconstruct like what makes developers better, what can help developers improve. So I think that's an interesting thesis. And just a little bit intro about me. I used to work in finance, and I a lot of my the way that I approach these things is from an investing lens, right? Like, what are good trends to invest in? What sets some qualities out from others that they're worthwhile paying attention to. In 2017, I did a career change. I took a boot camp. From 2018 to 19, I worked with Netlify, and in 2020, I just joined AWS as a senior developer advocate. I'm also an Egghead.io instructor, teaching React and TypeScript. I am a moderator on the r/React.js subreddit. There's 200,000 React people. If you want to learn more about React, definitely go join there. But I'm also interested in Svelte, so I help to co-organize the Svelte Society global series of meetups, and I also help to champion this idea of learning in public. And I think the reason I do all of this is basically to help people, you know, accelerate their learning, accelerate their personal and professional growth. And I think this talk really is going to encapsulate a big part of that. And I've been writing this book that really tries to nail down these things which I think are good ideas, right? Like learning in public, like open sourcing your knowledge, like doing first principles thinking and writing a lot, teaching things like how to bet on technologies, whether you should specialize and generalize, how to negotiate, or how to write, how to market yourself, all this stuff, right? But I still felt like it was not enough. And the reason I felt this way was because like everything I was working on was like kind of like one-off things, like just things that you have to just consciously do and then back off and do again and back off. And these are not as powerful as habits that you just do multiple times a day, every day, right? And it's this whole idea of like, if you have a compound growth factor, then you just try to get 1% better every day. You're 38 times better in 1 year and 775 million times better in 5 years. Obviously, nobody can compound forever like that. But it just goes to show that there is something in the really basic things that we do every day that we don't really think about. We just do automatically, and that's overwhelmingly very powerful to how we perform. And I want to talk about that. So I'm not going to talk about the tactics. Those are like, you can go Google those, you can go learn those. But the habits are just the simple things that are extremely powerful that we don't really stop to think about enough. So this talk is a little bit about that. Obviously, the main inspiration for this sort of zeitgeist of habits comes from James Clear, who basically talks about how basically everything important to us comes from habits and not really from any of those like small things that I just talked about, right? Your net worth is a lagging measure of your financial habits, whether you save or spend wisely. Your weight is a lagging measure of your eating habits, right? And it's just like energy in, energy out. Your knowledge is a lagging measure of your learning habits. Your clutter around your room, I have a lot of clutter, is a lagging measure of your cleaning habits. Like if you clean well, then you will have less clutter. You just get what you repeat. And I think that's a very, very fundamental point, because we do a lot of things repetitively in coding. And I think we should think about that every now and then, more than we probably currently do. And so this is where I want to focus, right? Like there's the outward facing part of you, and there's principles, strategies, and tactics. I can talk about that in another day, all day long, doesn't matter, right? But below all of that is all the habits that make all those things above possible, right? And those habits directly interface with your hardware, which is like your body and your brain, like. And your brain is kind of like this fuzzy thing because it's part of your body, but there's also this existence, this feeling of consciousness that supersedes your body. So I just kind of put them side by side. I don't really know which one is above the other. But I kind of call these like applications, like the user land, what you use your body and yourself for. And I call this underlying thing the operating system, where what you subconsciously are doing is still part of you. All these things are part of you. In fact, like it's like concentric circles of you, right? Like there's your body and brain, then there's your habits, which are things you don't even think about, and then there's the things that you consciously think about. And when people see you, they see the human, they see your career, they see your job, but sometimes maybe you extend beyond just yourself to your community and to your country. And I think that's an interesting way to think about these things. So, but here I'm just really talking about the most central part of you, which is body, brain, and habits. And I kind of compare this to the operating system, and this is a very flawed analogy. So I kind of feel weird about this because I never studied I never studied sort of college computer science. So I don't know every single element of operating systems, but I've been studying it for a few months before this talk, and so I want to try to see where this analogy goes. And if you know more than me, please feel free to call me out on where I'm wrong, or where you can see better points to make. So, here we're really talking about like how do we make our sort of system make use of the limited resources that we have, right? The hardware is what we're given with, what we're born with, right? We can't really do much about that, but we can do something about the operating system so that we can run more programs, we can run it better, we can run it faster. So that's what I really want to sort of think about, like how do we make this go so that we can do everything else better. And so part one is, I think, the most fundamental basic part, which is the firmware, right? Like if you don't have that interface with the hardware, then you really can't do much. So the first thing to talk about here is sleep. Like we should pay attention to sleep, and don't take it from me, take it from one of the developers. Like all the examples that I'm going to give here, a lot of them are drawn from well-known developers, and there's no one more well-known than Bill Gates probably. And he writes on his blog about why we sleep, and he says, in other words, sleep greatly enhances our evolutionary fitness, just in ways we can't see. And he really appreciates the value of that, even though he admits that when he was making Microsoft, he didn't sleep that well. And I think with the benefit of hindsight, he could have done so many things differently, and I think this is one of them. The other thing is ergonomics. So let's just do a poll. If you're watching, I'm sitting down, and I knew this was coming. So let's just do a poll. Are you sitting properly right now? So let's see if we can do a quick little poll. Oh, I can't. I'm sharing my screen. All right, I'm gonna just try and do a poll. How is your posture now? Bad. Just fixed it. Good. Okay. So I just tried to start a poll. I don't know if this works, but if you're watching, you can try to participate. And I just basically want you to have this habit of like constantly checking yourself. Nobody is always perfect at this, right? Like, especially unless you're a pianist. If you played piano, I think you're probably more practiced at this than most. But most of us, we just slouch down when we fixed it. So that's good. It's about 57% of people just fixed it, and I feel good, right? Like I stopped my talk halfway through, and I helped you, remind you of the importance of your posture. And I think people fundamentally know that this is important. So I'm going to end that poll, and I'm going to go back to my slides. Okay, it's a little bit more of a hassle to do this than I thought. So I may not do it as much as I was hoping. But all right, so but that's the main thing, right? Like we should. I think I'm sharing my slides. Let me just double check. I have to be so careful. Yeah, okay, I'm sharing my slides. Yeah, so a lot of us, like, we don't really pay much attention, especially if we're on our laptops and we're looking down in our cameras. I'm looking down at my laptop right now because I don't have a separate external camera, but normally my eye line is here, right? And I'm looking at my monitor, and then my monitor should be sort of at the same height as my eye line. So here's a quick list from a 4-step checklist from Peter Levels. It's levels.io/RSI. And he has these 4 like most important things. First of all, is your screen at arm's length away from you, right? Like right now it's not, because I'm talking to my laptop, but normally when I look at my monitor, it is an arm's length away from me. So that's just about far enough that my eyesight won't be ruined. Is the top of your screen at the same level as your eyes? And that's not so much about your eyes as your neck, right? As your neck supporting your head at all times. And if that is lasting, then it's gonna impact your spine. Is your elbow at a 90% rectangular angle on the table, and are your feet on the ground? Right. So if your chair is too high, you might be losing that support that your feet can actually give you. So that's a short list, but obviously there's more. And in particular, I want to sort of raise the level of general knowledge about RSI, because RSI ends programming careers. I've gone around and surveyed some people who have had RSI. They had to stop coding for 3 months, and some of them as much as 6 years. And obviously, I'm sure there's worse than that. But like, imagine if you suddenly came down with like a wrenching pain, and this is something that I've had because I write a lot, and I couldn't code for a day. I couldn't type on a keyboard. Every single button press was painful, and this sounds like something that it's just like only weak people have it, but trust me, like if you want to do this for 20, 30, 40 years, you're gonna run into stuff like this because it's the most repetitive thing you do in your day. There are multiple causes of RSI, so there's no one individual cause, and some of them could be psychosomatic, like personal, like subconscious stress and stuff like that. So definitely check out the research. I have a blog post on that, swix.io/writing/RSI tips, with some resources on causes of RSI, and like if you have it, go research it. You don't need to know that right now, but what you do need to know upfront before you have RSI is that pronating your wrist is bad. So if you pronate like this to type, that is normal because that's how most keyboards are organized, but that's actually not as natural as this, right? Like vertical. Tilting your wrist up is bad. That's tilting, and you should actually be tilting downwards. So it's kind of like how we have it over here. Long key travel, so pressing down as well as stretching out across. So remember that the QWERTY keyboard arrangement was actually made to extend the key travels to slow type people who type down, so that the old typewriters, wouldn't jam up as much. Obviously, now that everything's digital, we should actually be using Vorak or some other sort of keyboard arrangement, but we stuck to QWERTY for historical reasons. Multiple pressure points are really bad. So Control C, Control S, Control V. If you use Windows, you can actually map your control to caps lock. For Mac, I haven't found a good solution because I'm using Shift C, Shift S, and Shift V a lot, or Command Shift S, Command Shift V, or whatever. And so I think the best, I like this. I like this recommendation of using both hands to type combination keystrokes, so you don't actually strain the muscles here that much. And ultimately, it's just never cured. It's just managed. So if you just like do years and years and years of damage to yourself, be prepared that you may not be able to reverse it. So might as well take some preventative cures for now. Basic fixes. So this guy actually, so I went on Hacker News and looked for all the RSI cases, and this guy was like, I put my hands in the warm water for 15 minutes and it worked. And I've seen, this is not just him. There's other people. So sometimes warm water works. Sometimes a more ergonomic keyboard. This is the Microsoft Natural. This is the mouse, the vertical mouse. This is $90, so that's still affordable. And as well as some stretching exercises like that, or the prayer where you can like that, and you just sort of go down. And just every now and then, just like make sure to take a break and give your hands some rest. So there's some software that actually helps you sort of enforce pauses, Workrave, but then there's other sort of RSI software that you can go look into if you want to. But all this is cheaper than stopping coding for for 6 years. So I think the basic ones are the minimum that we should try to think about. Once you start having like a severe pain, I think I'm about here. So once you start having severe pain, then you might want to make more drastic changes to the way that you code, including using like a more advanced sort of ergonomic keyboard. This is like a tilted one below your desk, so that you're just forced to tilt down instead of tilt up, right? Or you can use a vertical keyboard like that. You can use voice coding. So there's a very impressive demo of Talon voice coding on the Google Cloud Platform podcast, which actually just shows you how you it's actually not that hard if you just learn their language. It's actually pretty it's not too bad, and it's not as error prone as you might think once you're used to it. So I think those are interesting opportunities to check out. A lot of people survive Vorak as well as wrist braces as well. So and wrist braces, not for while you type, but actually while you sleep, so that you're not cramping up. I don't know if this sounds ridiculous to you, but like, it's real. You have one body, so take care of it, right? Okay. So I was gonna poll how often you exercise, but I think that's gonna interrupt me too much, and I don't have that much time. So I'm gonna just fast forward, right? Obviously, not a lot of us don't exercise enough. Actually, since the coronavirus period started, I've started exercising almost daily, basically because that's the only way I can go out without a mask, and I just run. And I think that's a really good way to think and not stare at the screen all the time. And I highly recommend it. And I think we should all do that. basically it helps to get us away from the sitting down for like so many hours of the day. Like some of us sit down for like 12 hours a day, right? Your blood starts to flow slower. Like you have more insulin release, so you have more risk of diabetes. Your brain gets less oxygen. Just all the bad things, right? There's just so many problems with sitting too much. So we're going to fix this today in this talk by doing some air squats. Okay. So the problem is I cannot see you. So I'm going to trust that you're going to do this with me, because I'm just going to look like a fool. But I just want to make sure, like, I just want to like remind you that these are things that you just like take care of your body, right? Okay. So I'm just going to do a 3 air squats. But normally, like in a conference setting, Kenzie Dodds or Ben and Leg will do like 10. But so basically, you want to keep your lumbar curve maintained. I think the main thing is depth, like your butt just goes below your knees, right? Like that. The only female model I had just went to here, but do what you can. And you just kind of go like that, right? Air squats. 1, 2, and just like do the full stretch. Feel your motion, and I'm already feeling better because I'm not sitting down, right? I'm like stretching out the back of my back. All right, down one more time, and air squats. Okay, I feel better. I was sitting down, but now like my sort of core is activated, and I feel more energized already just doing this. It actually probably helps that I cannot see your face, because I don't know how ridiculous that looked. Okay. And you probably, just by doing that, you probably earned some income. So someone did a regression analysis of that Stack Overflow survey versus how much they made, because they have all the individual data points. And apparently people who work out 3 to 4 times a week make about 2 to 3%, and it's statistically significant. So that's a very interesting outcome. So like correlation is not causation. Maybe people who make more just work out more, or people who work out more make more. You don't really know. The other big part is, of course, also eating. We were told when we were growing up that we had this old food pyramid, which is like 40% bread. Sorry, I got things going on. And now obviously I think people are a bit wiser about the harms of carbs. So we have this like keto pyramid. But obviously the main thing that we should not do is the software developers food pyramid with all the pizza, donuts, Mountain Dew, Cheetos, Hot Pocket, whatever. We should be smart about what we eat. I'm still learning this. Obviously, I have a lot of flaws in these areas as well. But I think these are just like fundamental things that are just like governing our sort of firmware, right? Like the way that we work with ourselves. So work from home ideas to consider. Turning off Wi-Fi at night. I think this is a great idea. Like, so here's like a timer switch, but some Wi-Fi routers actually come with configurations internally within the router software that switch off like at 10 p.m. every day. And so you can go and turn it back on if you really need to. But this is just a prompt, an external prompt that just says like, all right, time to sleep, right? Same for sleep mask. Like if you have a sleep mask on, you're not looking around, you're not, no like flashes will come and interrupt your sleep. So it just helps you sleep better. Take care of basic ergonomics like we talked about earlier. Eat slower. Like it takes 25 minutes to actually register that signal of being full. So the one way to eat less is just eat slower. Don't eat at your desk, like move around more, right? So you don't also stay still while you're eating. Take care of your snacks, like, take out all the really sort of unhealthy snacks and put in something healthier like apples or something. Exercise 3 times a week and drink more water. So that reminds me, drink more water. I actually found a comment on Hacker News that someone configured their Emacs to trigger a reminder to go drink water every 20 saves. So the Emacs editor was counting the number of times you save, and every time you save 20 times, that person had to go drink water. So I think she figured out something that was really clever, and I don't know, I might make that for VS Code. I think that's a really good idea. This is quoted from Scott Hanselman from the C# sort of Microsoft developer ecosystem. And he says, for new developers, like, take care of yourself. This job can destroy your hands, back, shoulders. Like when you, in terms of like listening to developers who have been doing this for a while, Scott is one of them who have just been doing this for many decades. And this is the best that we can do to like sort of go time travel forward, right? And listen to the advice that they're trying to give us. We might probably ignore them because we feel young, but all these things are important. And if you want to have a long career in this industry, you probably want to pay attention to this stuff. Okay, so that's part one, firmware. It's probably the longest part. Part two is about external devices, right? Firmware is about the body that the hardware that you have, but then there's the body, there's the stuff that's around you that you can also deal with. So in computers, we have a sort of hierarchy of memory, starting from the CPU, the caches, the RAM, SSDs, and hard disk drives, and these are just like sort of fanning out in terms of processor speed and all that. And that's actually analogous to how humans remember and forget. So like 20 minutes from now, you're going to forget 40% of my talk. A day from now, you're going to forget 2/3 of it. And that's just normal. That's just like our working memory is just not that good. So one way to combat it is actually to do repetition, right? Like I record this, I write this down, I take notes, and then I go back and refer to the notes, and it sort of spikes back up our repetition. I think spaced repetition learning is probably like the only free lunch as far as learning is concerned, because like we understand this so extremely well, and there's a lot of us don't do it when it comes to our own learning. But mostly, like, I want to encourage you to write things down. Like, that's a writing habit, right? Take notes, take journals, and write blog posts. Like sometimes, I tend to encourage people to, like, not everything that you should do should be private. Try to make public, maybe 10-20% of your work, and see, and you can see that sort of network benefits. But writing is the easiest way to scale yourself. It helps you organize your thoughts, and someone who has organized thoughts is infinitely smarter than someone who's just like a jumble of like a messed stuff. And it's also a really good way to prototype ideas, right? Before you write a single line of code, just write. And I think that's one way to sort of save your incoming jobs, and that actually increases your productivity as well. I have a much longer post on the benefits of writing, but this is what's relevant to this talk. I also like this post from Sahil Lavindia, also another developer and co-founder of Gumroad. And he talks about writing as a cache of like all your knowledge, right? So as you interface with everyone else around you, instead of like you spending one-on-one FaceTime with everyone, you should write, and then that can scale without you being present. And that's how WordPress is run. That's how Gumroad is run, and that's how like especially now that we're doing all remote and async. The only way to do async is to write things down. So I definitely think like this, your writing becomes a second part of you that lives outside of you, and that can do a lot that you cannot do on your own. For example, repeat yourself infinitely. So I think that's very interesting to think about. Like I'm repeating this guy infinitely because he wrote things down, right? Then the last part the second last part of sort of the external devices, I think it's networking, right? Like computers are not only so interesting by themselves; they're more interesting when they can talk to other computers, and it scales with the value of Metcalfe's law, right? Where it's basically exponential with the number of nodes, and I think that applies to humans as well. Like the number of people in your network is a material value of you as a coder. Over and above just you in terms of your programming skills and abilities, right? So we should probably think about that as well. One way to get started with your networking is basically to look for mentors by picking out what they put down. Like if they put out a new library, go try it out. If they have a new demo, go read the source code and write a blog post about it. And I personally did this, right? When I was starting out, I had no followers, no standing with the React team whatsoever, and they just launched their new API. I went and did a full walkthrough of their demo. Like I stayed up all night and wrote this full demo, and they reviewed it because they don't have a choice, right? That's one way to just really guarantee that someone's going to pay attention is by picking up what they just put down. And it's a really, really neat hack. And there's so many examples of this, but that's one really good way to network, because you're basically piggybacking on someone who already has a network. The other important thing to get right is to market yourself. I do have a blog post, sux.io/writing/marketing yourself, that talks a little bit more about this. But basically, you want to nail down what you want other people to know about you, your personal brand. You want to nail down what you're interested in claiming, like your domain, and you want to nail down what the things that you've done, what you can offer to other people, like your business value or your tech skills. And you want to be able to do it in public and at work. And I talk a little bit more in the blog post about that. Unfortunately, I don't have time here. One more thing about this sort of external devices around your body, which is also part of you, is also your environment. So especially if you're remote, you should separate your work versus your bedroom, right? Like if you work where you sleep, then like your sort of work and life just meld together in one long stretch, and it can be quite disruptive for your daily rhythm. You should think about things like your temperature, like whether you're working in an optimal temperature for work, whether you can be interrupted. Like my sister just interrupted me just now. I should have put some sign on the door saying, I'm recording. And I think other people who have for professional work from homers do that. Like Wes Boss, I think, has a red light outside of his door, and whenever he has a red light outside of his door, his family knows that they should not come interrupt him because he's recording, and that's their main source of income. Vertical monitors. This one I saw from Andre Staltz, an interesting sort of hack in terms of like readability of logs and stuff like that. The level of oxygen, like if you want to put plants in your room, like, we respond to the levels of oxygen and even fairly minute changes. The music that's playing, Brain.fm is sort of tuned to increase your sort of thinking cycles, as well as FreeCodeCam's Code Radio. This is just like a free alternative to Brain.fm, and I really like them. Having a closed or open door. I think this one was talked about by Richard Hamming in his talk, You and Your Research, and I highly recommend that talk because it's also another life and career advice talk. And closed doors gives you more focus, but then people feel like they can't come visit you as much, right? So if you have some sort of open door policy, sometimes you get more serendipity. So it's kind of like a debate what kind of mode you want to be in. Microsoft does really good research, and again, this is not so relevant in if you're working from home, but if you're going back to an office, people with more physical floor space and more access to quiet and private workspaces and more ability to reduce interruptions have better performance in general. So Microsoft, has a whole research division studying developer productivity. So basically, your environment matters, and that should not be a surprise. I also called this last part, I also call virtualization. Like, can you virtualize the other developers that you deal with inside of your head? Like, can you simulate like a little Docker container of them, right? And for example, when I submit a PR, I would code review myself with the view of like I know the person who's going to review this. Let me answer preemptively all the questions that she's going to ask, so that I skip a step, I skip a round trip, right? And that's very considerate, and everyone always appreciates that. And also indicating like the degree to which you care. So this is Netlify's feedback letter. I wrote a blog post on the Netlify blog about it, if you want to check that out. And this is what we use to indicate like how serious an issue sort of review comment is. A lot of times we'll say like nit or not nit, or and that's it. But that's very sort of that's too coarse. Like, we need something more fine grained to communicate how much we care and how important it is, and to just normalize the fact that at any time we can block PRs, or we can just bias towards action, merge stuff in with agreement to fix stuff later. So that actually speeds up the speed of shipping. Okay, so now we're on to part 3 of 4. This is the scheduler, and this basically concerns how you get things done, right? So and it's very similar to in operating systems, the idea of a process manager. Like, there's something somewhere, like the experience that you have of multiple apps running all at the same time in concurrently is basically simulated, right? Like there's threads going on, and the operating system can interrupt in time slice to serve another thread, and so that's very analogous to the way that you multitask as well, right? So the key questions to ask about like the way that you do things are you dropping tasks? Are you prioritizing low priority tasks over high priority tasks? That means your schedule is buggy, right? You got to fix it. Are you bad at task switching? Like when you need to switch, do you feel like a big adjustment? Like, do you have everything that you need in order to do it well? Are you bad at terminating clearly stalled apps? Like, if you're well over time on something and you just keep going, you just keep like throwing more time after bad time in the commitment of fixing it instead of just killing it, right? Like, sometimes you just need to kill a stalled process. I think a lot of people do a lot of operating systems deal with it by having like a short term, sometimes a medium term, and a long term scheduler. And basically, there's a job, like all this jobs coming into the CPU, and there's only one CPU. You have to have a pool of waiting jobs, and you have to have a queue of like things that you're going to do. So this is kind of like your Jira board, like, like all your issue tracker, whatever. And then this is kind of like your to-do list of things to do that day, right? And you kind of pick it off, right? And then you do them during the day, and whatever you're now stalled on, you just throw it back onto the queue, right? Like that's like a very, very basic scheduling process. And this is analogous, I think, to the philosophy of getting things done. So if you're a productivity sort of guru, this is a book that's basically got the ultimate answer to this. I feel like there's not really any better. And basically, this is a process to triage all the issues coming in to your life, like all your emails, all your texts, all your just like random things, right? So this is a workflow to ask, like, is it actionable? If it's not, throw it away, chuck it in a reference pile, whatever. If it is actionable, you process it, right? Like chuck it in a project planning process. If it takes less than 2 minutes, do it right away, right? So you just it's just out from your memory and it doesn't pile up in tons of garbage. If it takes more than two minutes, you can try and delegate it or defer it. And there's a specific list that is recommended in the GTD methodology. You may not follow exactly this list, but it's this idea that you have one workflow that makes sense, that just catches everything that ever comes into your life. And I think that is much better than just like do whatever you feel like at any point in time. And maybe sometimes you do it, you catch stuff, and maybe sometimes you don't. I think most recently, I signed up for Hey, this sort of email app. Where is it? Here. Okay. All right. So let's talk about like scheduling criteria. Like we have developed operating systems to make the most out of limited processing time, and these, like, we understand that these algorithms are like basically best in class for doing this. So it should be understandable that we can actually bring a lot of this and apply it to our own lives. I think that's a very interesting idea to think about. So we should want to maximize utilization and throughput, and we want to minimize turnaround time, waiting time, response time for each individual app and dependency that comes in. So these are just very interesting ways to think about. Like it's an analogy, right? All analogies are flawed in some way, but if it's helpful, then we should think about that, right? So for example, like for email, Basecamp basically went and said, like, hey, what if we apply getting things done, the GTD methodology to email, right? And said that all emails come into like this inbox, right? But some of them are just screened out to a news feed, which they're not time sensitive, or if they're sort of receipts and transactions, then they're screened out to a paper trail. And then we on terms of the triagers can put it into separate queues for the set aside, reply later, and we can look up stuff separately. Like this is a workflow for email, and I think if we have a workflow for our lives based on a good sort of scheduling sort of algorithm, I think that will clean up our lives a lot and make us seem a lot more productive with the existing resources that we have. And that's the whole point of this talk, right? So there are multiple scheduling algorithms. If you haven't dealt at this low level, you might want to read up about those. But sometimes we might just do the shortest thing first. Whatever is like the shortest to the deadline, we might do that first. Or we might do round robin, like we just pay an equal amount of attention to each thing on our plate. But I think probably the one that makes the most sense is priority scheduling, like some sort of trade-off of like, okay, this is higher priority, so I'll go do that. But then I'll like before some other stuff comes due, I'll go switch to that as well. And just try to trade off prioritization over expiration of deadlines. And for humans, that's for machines. This is for humans. For humans, I think the Eisenhower decision matrix comes in really handy. So basically, it's this idea of like everything in your life fits into this 4 boxes, right? Like if it's important and urgent, you should do it right away. If it's important and not urgent, you should schedule time to do it. But we're really bad at this because most of the time we spend our time on things that are urgent but not important. Like all the notifications in our life, all the Twitter threads, all the whatever. There's just a lot of like urgent, like sale now, act now, or this will be gone, or like whatever. Like there's just a lot of like random stuff that is just not important, but it just seems urgent. And then there's not important, not urgent. We tend to hang on to it just because it's fun, but we might want to get rid of it for the other stuff. And basically, it's just like reorient your priorities, right? Because like when you put it like this, it's very clear what you should do. But without a framework, and when we do whatever we feel like doing, we can tend to stick towards like the urgent stuff only and forget the important but not urgent stuff, right? The slow moving projects. Or we might stick to the not urgent and not important stuff and spend our time here because it's just fun, right? And that may be not something that we want to behave longer term. So this is, for example, Sarah Drasner believes in this a lot. So this is from her CSS Tricks post on prioritization. That's the title of the post, CSS Tricks Prioritization. And for her, she also likes to batch these things. So, for example, all meetings should happen in succession. I used to work for her, so I know, like, I've seen her calendar, and it's literally meeting. And the idea is that the switching costs between meetings is lower than switching costs from meeting to work to meeting to work, right? So that's a very interesting idea. And then also intra week. So like earlier in the week, more meetings. Later in the week, more coding. Right. So especially uninterrupted time. So for her, she has her Thursdays just blocked off for coding. That's why she can still be a manager and an individual contributor. And basically you should try to match that to your own natural sort of body rhythm, right? Like sometimes your energy levels are high and you're more tuned to doing some of these things, and sometimes it's low. So just schedule your work, like just trust in your body to behave the way that it naturally behaves. So this is very tied to the idea of chronotypes. I don't know who came up with these animals. I think that the wolf should be the night owl, because that's what we all say, night owls. I'm a night owl. I wake up late and I work at night. But chronotypes are real. Diurnal rhythms are real, and we should think about when we schedule work, because we are not equally productive throughout the entire day. So more resources. Paul Graham has like a manager schedule, make a schedule idea thesis, which I really like. Mark Andreessen also has a personal guide to productivity. I recommend having a single calendar app. Whether for me, it used to be Google, now it's Outlook because I work at Amazon. And I also really like the Microsoft To Do app. So here's my To Do app, and when you clear everything, it shows you a nice picture. So I think it's basically a really good app. So I recommend it. Okay, last part, the kernel. So this is the shortest part because it's the most personal, and it involves the ghost in the machine, right? When we have that original idea of an operating system, inside of the operating system, the really like irreducible core of the operating system is that kernel. Obviously, like different, there are multiple different types of kernels. Some are like sort of more monolithic, some are smaller. But basically, there's all that core of that operating system that sort of sits between the hardware and all the software on top of it. So it's what really sort of calls, it's like the sort of main process. It calls all the other processes, and it's sort of, that's your irreducible thread and drive, right? So I've seen this happen to developers, right? They sort of burn out. They're like, I'm disillusioned with technology. I can code, but I don't feel like it. I don't have a passion anymore. I don't enjoy coding. Or like I work at a big co and I am doing nothing with my life. And that's very sad. Because a lot of people wouldn't give a lot to have what you have, and to see it die because you've lost passion and motivation is a tragedy. And I think we should think about how to keep that alive within us, to do something productive with our skills, with our lives, with our privilege. So I think that's why I reserve like 1 out of 4 of these points to this. I don't know what to call it. I think so. Daniel Vassallo, for example, calls it intrinsic motivation, and he observed that he worked at Amazon. He went from like some 100K to 500K in income, right? And every time he thought like, okay, reaching the next level, then I'll be happy, then I'll be happy, then I'll be happy. But always it just wears off, and it's actually almost like negatively correlated with his motivation is negatively correlated with his compensation and promotions and recognition, because those are the games that the company sort of sets you up to play. And it feels good for a while, but it wears off quickly. So I think something that really probably lasts longer than looking for the highest compensation is probably something bigger. It has a lot of different names, right? It's like a purpose, a vision, a mission, calling, intrinsic motivation. I like the word drive, and I take this from the book Drive. And I think this passage basically sums it up. Like, as children, we are driven by our inner desires to learn, to discover, to help others. But then we grow up, and then we're programmed by our society to need extrinsic motivations. If we take out the trash, study hard, and work tirelessly, we'll be rewarded with friendly praise, high grades, and good paychecks. So slowly we lose more and more of our intrinsic motivation, and we're not so much human anymore, right? We're just like sort of units of labor for the corporation. And I think the main insight is that have the existence of extrinsic promises destroy your intrinsic motivation. So you really need to guard your intrinsic motivation, because that is basically you. And I think that's sort of my summation of like sort of reading all of this. These other two perspectives I really like a lot. So there's this concept of ikigai, right? The thing that you should do is this intersection of what you love, what you're good at, what the world needs, and what you can be paid for. And Tim Urban over at Wait But Why also has this sort of career advice blog post where he talks about the 5-legged octopus, where you should basically do some intersection of something that you enjoy from personal, lifestyle, practical, and moral and social basis. So I like that moral bit. Like you should be morally comfortable with what you do. And basically that's it. Like I can't really answer for you the kernel bit, but for me, it's helping people learn in public and live better lives as developers. But these are all sort of like the operating system that should underlie everything that you do as a developer, right? And sort of help you manage your hardware. And I think that's a very, very sort of interesting way to think about this. It's again, it's an analogy. It's not accurate, but it might be useful. Here, I was going to do a poll. I was going to remind you to say properly again, because you probably slouched over during the talk, and just I just did that myself. But I think try to set reminders. Try to have better ergonomics in your life. That's the baseline, right? That's habit number one. That's take care of your firmware, right? Use your firmware, upgrade your firmware to take care of your hardware. That's something that you cannot escape, right? This is the only thing that you have. The last point I want to make is that your emotions also matter. They're kind of like the health check on your whole operating system, like your monitoring system. Like if you have some logs and dashboard metrics, your emotions are basically your system telling you how you're doing, and how you feel is valid. Like we don't talk about emotions here, right? No, there's no emotions. It's like we're a machine, but we're not machines, right? We're humans, and the way that we act out, or the way that we sort of manifest whether we're doing well or not, is how we feel. It's okay to ask for help, including going to therapy. Everyone has insecurities. Everyone has some imposter syndrome as to like not knowing what we're doing. Right? We always sort of make things up as we go along. And we sort of venerate like learning how to learn, right? Like, oh, if only I learned this next technology, this next language, this like next thing, and I learn better. I learn how to learn, and I look at all these like great mentors, and if only I could be like them, then I'll be happy. Instead of doing that, because there's just never ends ever. It might be better to just be happy and learn how to be content with what you already have. You're going to make mistakes along the way, so also don't forget to forgive yourself for screwing up, because nobody does all this perfectly. So the philosophy I have for sort of like contentment of this is to realize that good enough is better than best. Like we're always trying to look for the best something, the best framework, the best language, the best job, the best career, the best industry. Those exist. There are objective bests, but they might be so hard to look for, and you might lose yourself in the journey of getting there. Because when you look for the best, you obsess over benchmarks, you care what influencers think, and you have to like keep up with all the news at all times. Whereas that's very external facing. Whereas if you only focus on good enough, you focus on what you need, what you know well, what you enjoy, and that's good enough. That's the definition of need. Like you only need what is good enough. You don't actually need the best. Especially if it's more reversible, then just whatever. If it's reversible, just decide on whenever you can reverse it in the future. So the costs of looking for the best are that you might lose happiness. You might see the world as zero sum. You might lose efficiency because the last 20% of everything, is going to take 80% of the effort. Is that worth it? Maybe not. Maybe the best is not the best. As well as agency. Like if you let other people define for you what is the best, like, are you employee of the month? Are you like, are you checking off all the checkbox in your OKRs? Then you're playing their game, and you lose agency to decide what is good for you. So those are the costs of seeking the best rather than the good enough for you. And just remember that, again, back to the emotions thing, you're going to go through such like troughs and peaks, right? Like before you reach your sort of nirvana of like, I'm proud of creating something great like your career, you might go through some despair and swamps of despair. And I think just understanding that there is an emotional journey and being okay with that. Like if you're here, understand that there is better, keep going. If you're going through hell, keep going. If you're here, also understand that there's probably a next wave after this. So like, it's never as bad as it seems. It's never as great as it seems, right? Just have some grounding in terms of where you are emotionally. And you're going to do fine. So that's the operating system of you. That's sort of one of the chapters in my book, and that's how I kind of fit this in terms of like where how we as a programmer, like we as a programmer, we have this like hardware. Then we have all these sort of operating system, like our habits, our firmware, our scheduler, or whatever. And then we have all these like more tactical things, more practical applications that we do, and we apply that towards being human, apply that towards planning our career, and we apply that towards doing well at our jobs. I think all of these like sort of come together to form what we are, right? It's this sort of multi-layered thing. So I think I've been trying to explore that. I'm really excited to share this with you because it's hard to get a technical talk accepted. But that's it. I think that's all the time I have. You can follow the progress of the book. It's not launched yet. I'm launching it on July 1st, but you can already buy it pre-sale at twitter.com/coding_career. And I think that's it for me. I'll look for questions and answer them in the chat. But apart from that, thank you very much. All right, I'm gonna end this somehow. How do I end this? Okay, I think I can't end this, but I can take Q&A now. Thanks. Okay, so all right, I'm gonna put the link to that talk. Speakers. Also, yeah, don't forget to take a break, go for drinks, whatever. Try to end on time. Basically, I had 15 minutes. I had 55 minutes, so I went for 55 minutes. I'll be doing versions of this talk again. I think I'm doing one again at Cascada.js. I'll try to improve it every time. But this was the first time I did it. So I love your feedback. You can tweet at me or you can sort of reply here. It doesn't really matter. And I'm trying to get better as a speaker, but it's not that important. Like I just want to share ideas with you and I want to see what ideas you have. Florian says, I was wondering if there's any tools to assist real life GTD that you know of. Yeah, there are a lot of tools for GTD. There's custom design workflow. I don't know all of them. So the resource that I'd probably go to is Tiago Forte. Just Google GTD. I personally, I'm very low tech. I use Notion. I use To-Do, like the Microsoft To-Do app. I use Hey now, the Hey email app. And that's about it. Like you should try to keep a single source of truth that you can manipulate very well, that you'll know that will last forever. You can move tools for sure. Like I moved from OneNote to Notion, but it doesn't really matter as long as you have the same workflow and you know yourself well enough that you're handling everything that comes in for you. So that makes you more capable as a sort of person, as a future executive, if you want to go down that route. Basically have your shit together. So, yeah, I think GTD is definitely more about workflow than about tools. That said, I'm tempted to code my own GTD tool someday, but for now I just use default other tools. All right, I think that's about it. You know how to find me. I'm at Swix. And yeah, have a great conference. I think this is such a great opportunity, and I'm looking forward to the other talks too. All right, bye.